Hi everyone, welcome to Walpurgisnacht on Vegan Kitchen Witchery. My name is Jenny. It is time to dust off those broomsticks and pick the fur out of those witchy hats. Thank you, kitty. And to give your kitchen witch a lovely little makeover, because tonight we are celebrating the Night of the Witches, traditionally celebrated in spring, even though it's autumn where I live. Going to cook up a few tasty morsels for you. Bread and cheese, of course, the ultimate indulgence, paired of course with wine. And I've got a sexy little cocktail that I'm going to show you how to make. Very, very girly, very, very feminine. So let's just light up that cauldron and get to work. Just add these two ingredients in the pot together, just to make sure the hob is on, and there's no need to boil water first. Just get everything in there and start stirring quite easy. When it starts to simmer, just make sure you stir off all the excess at the bottom. Everything in the water should be nice and clear before you start adding the other ingredients. Now, I use lemon, but you can use orange if you want to, and just about that much. I just want to hint at the lemon, not overpower the flavor. And here you can't see it, but I'm actually adding some vanilla. I use the extract. Please feel free to use the pods. They are just as good, if not even better. Now, I'm adding rose water to this recipe. You really don't need to if you're going to steep the rose petals in the syrup for a couple of days, but this is a security for me since in the past the flavor wasn't as good, so I'm just using it for this particular recipe to make sure that it's nice and rosy but not too overpowering. So have a taste test before you start pouring everything into those sterilized jars. Here I of course made sure that I spilt it all over the bench, but of course other more seasoned kitchen witches may not do that. You'll need to sterilize the jars in boiling water for about 10 minutes and put the lid on and keep them nice and cool for the next couple of days. I like to stir the rose petals in just to release more flavor and to get those petals releasing their beautiful color. You should end up with something very nice and very pink in the next couple of days. You'll need to strain off those rose petals. I like to keep them for adding to tea and water. So don't throw them out if you don't want to. They will keep in the fridge for a few days. Look at that color. You just want to make sure you want to strain everything out of that very well. Pop them into another vessel. I use the jar, but you don't need to use a jar, use a bottle. And it's a beautiful spring type drink. Although it's not spring here in the southern hemisphere for Walpurgisnacht, it is autumn. It's currently the eve of Samhain, which usually means that it's getting colder and darker. And as much as I would like to have a bonfire tonight for the auspicious occasion and to be very traditional, it is raining here, and so the bonfire won't be happening, but that's okay because where I'm from there has been some pretty bad droughts. So I am grateful for the blessing of rain, and my garden is also expressing its joy at the moment. And I have a lot of herbs and trees in flower and that are recovering from that horrible hot weather. Especially my little witchy herb garden, and that's thriving now in a time where it's meant to be dying back and having a rest. So life still prevails after the drought, and I'm really grateful for that. And so are the bees, and luckily for me the bees haven't stopped here regardless of the change in the seasons, and it's just wonderful to see everything springing to life out here in the cold and with the shorter days and the longer nights. But without further ado, let's get back inside and start cooking. We'll start off with the bread, and I love this bread. For this recipe, you'll need some plain flour. Please feel free to use the strong stuff. The edible charcoal, instant dried yeast. I prefer to use sea salt flakes, but any salt will do. And just water at room temperature or lukewarm. Now I just want to add all the dry ingredients to the bowl. I'm going to be using a KitchenAid. I don't actually recommend doing this by hand because of the texture required, and you'll see why after we start adding the rest of these ingredients through. I like to use 1.5 tablespoons of charcoal and see how the colour looks. We do want something very dark. In fact, we want it black, but here it will look grey, as you can see in the picture. Don't worry too much about that. As an intuitive cook, I just add bits and pieces as I go along, and there's no need to soak the yeast. Just add it in there with the mix, and look at that colour. That is going to be one black loaf of bread. So dry ingredients first, wet ingredients second, and the texture of this bread is very different. It is very elastic. When you see it mixing in the machine, you'll see what I mean. It doesn't look like an ordinary dough for bread. It looks more elastic, and for some reason just the word blobular comes to mind. Thank you, Ken Dodd. But don't treat it like a normal bread at this point. I'm going to show you after adding a little bit more water, because I did add extra charcoal, just how elastic that bread needs to look before it does its first rise. You can't see it too well here, but you will see it in this shot. When I put the spatula in, you'll see just how much that dough resists. That's how elastic you want it. It is quite a wet dough. And at this point, you should pop a tea towel over it, place it somewhere warm for a good hour, and look what happens. That is what happens. I'd say that's more than double. Now at this point you want to do your first fold. So it's had a first rise and a first fold is what's happening here. You need to grease up those hands with olive oil. You don't want to tear the dough. And with one hand you want to turn the bowl, and with the other you want to slide and fold like you're turning the dough in onto itself, making a parcel type shape. Try not to tear it at this point too much. And this encourages all those focaccia type bubbles, and it's going to look amazing. Again, cover it with a tea towel, put it in another place for an hour or so, nice and warm place. And this is what happens again. It's even softer and higher now. You'll need to grease up those hands again, and just repeat that process from the last time. And it is much easier to handle this time around. Just turn and fold, turn and fold. This will be the last fold. There are only 2 folds to make this bread, but there are more rises, okay? So once we let this rise again for another hour, you can transfer it onto the baking sheet. Make sure your hands are well greased when you're handling this dough at all times. It's just better for you and it's better for the dough. So just see how elastic this dough is. And when you pour it onto your baking sheet or in a dish, some people like to use a square dish. I prefer the free form style. What you want to do is with your hands just gently encourage it outwards. You try not to tear it, and keep those hands well oiled, just like you can see here. This is an excellent time to put in intention. So if that's something that you enjoy as a kitchen witch, this is a really, really good time, a hands-on time to put the intent into the focaccia. So once you're finished there, maybe about 2 centimeters thick, let it rise and prepare those marinated pepper strips or any other type of herb or vegetable that you like. I'm using these to make the love hearts, it's just easier. And as I place them on this risen dough, I'm making the hearts a little bit skinnier and a little bit closer together because the dough will expand and rise. And I still want them to maintain their heart shape. So that's just a little bit of a tip for you there. And because you've put enough oil on your hands, there's really no need to apply any more olive oil. what you'll need to do is poke it with your finger. So this gives it that traditional focaccia look and also helps it to cook evenly, and I like to sprinkle salt on it before popping it in the oven. And while that is baking, let's start with this gorgeous smoked paprika cheese. I absolutely love this cheese, and if you are on the eve of Beltane there, add chili to the cheese because that will give it an awesome Beltane feel. Sorry, correct pronunciation, Beltane, as the Irish do. So with this cheese, it's actually more simple than it looks when you're reading it. It's basically chuck everything into a high-speed blender. I personally have not used another type of blender for this. I've only ever used high-speed. Pop all the ingredients in and blitz until you get a really smooth consistency. I do not melt the coconut oil. I pop it in there just as it is from the jar and let everything mix through there. Now, while that is blitzing, take a good look at it, scrape down the sides and make sure it's very smooth, that there are no chunks of cashew in there. It's very disappointing when there is. And have a taste test right now. It should taste quite concentrated. And you want that because the water and the agar are going to dull that flavor just a bit. Okay, so you want that done. Now, for those of you that haven't used agar before, it's scary at first, but once you get to know it, it's actually quite a good medium to use in the kitchen, especially if you're vegan and you want to make a sliceable cheese. Just make sure that you treat it like any other gelatine that you remember using before. If you've used it before, you can't let it congeal at the bottom of the saucepan, so keep that whisk going and make sure you scrape around the whole bottom surface and the sides. Now, you'll need to boil that for a minute and stir, and then act really quickly when that's finished and pop it back in that blender with everything. In this video, I still think I was too slow because I still had to scrape down the sides, but usually I'm a bit faster and I don't have to do that. As soon as you take the agar off the hob, it is going to start to set. So you need to act really fast to get it into that blender and mix it with the basis of the cheese dip. It's essentially a dip. In fact, you could actually eat it as a dip, really. I've rigged up something to make the witchy hat shape here. I don't have any sort of professional setup to make a cone. So yes, I had to do a little bit of a MacGyver job here, but it worked out in the end, as you saw from the picture, and it will taste just as good. When it's not Walpurgisnacht, I just grease up a little bowl and put it in there and it makes a nice dome shape. Don't forget to make the little brim as well for the bottom of your hat. I just used a little teacup saucer, but you can use any other medium if you prefer. If you've got something better than this, I actually wish I'd used a flatter surface, but hindsight, really. After at least 2 hours in the fridge, this is what the cheese will look like. As you can see, it's quite firm. I can handle it. I'm not putting any dents into the cheese. It looks amazing. It smells amazing. That smoked paprika really comes through. Please feel free to use normal paprika, like the sweet Hungarian if you want to. You don't have to use smoked. I just prefer the smoked. So from here on, it's really just an assembly job. I'm just going to make sure that the cone part of the hat is straight and even before I start applying the next part, which is the black sesame seeds, or you can use poppy seeds. You can even use some more of that activated charcoal if you want to be really pedantic about not letting any of that orange come through, but I actually quite enjoy that orange coming through. It makes it look more sour-y, if you get my drift, if that's even a word. So I can't tell you how glad I was that that didn't tear. I really thought it was going to. I thought all my nightmares had come at once. So just pop some of those seeds on a plate and just roll it through. Don't be too scared to handle this cheese. It can handle a lot of fingers, okay? It will not dent. Just be respectful, but realize it is a sliceable cheese, so it's not really soft at all. It has a beautiful silken texture. So just get all those seeds on there, roll it about a bit, and it's just another assembly job from here. And use anything you like to decorate the brim. I chose carrots, but be even more adventurous. Use herbs, use flowers, use other vegetables, use fruit. Anything goes, really. But while that's setting, I'm just setting up for the evening. This is a little branch that I decorate with the seasons on my dining room table. I don't have an altar per se, but this is something that I particularly enjoy, and I change the ribbons with the seasons using colour magic, I guess you could say. And because the next night is going to be Samhain here in the Southern Hemisphere, I'm putting on some jack-o'-lantern little lights. My daughter loves these little lights, so I like to pop them in the middle of the table with the candles that I've chosen for the season, and make everything look really festive and cozy. When the lights go down, it just creates a beautiful atmosphere that I enjoy. And this is what really makes the atmosphere more enjoyable, is great food, great wine, especially when you've made it all yourself. So I love using Prosecco, but to make this non-alcoholic, try lemonade or just plain mineral or soda water. You don't have to use alcohol for this cocktail. It can be a beautiful mocktail as well. I've enjoyed it both ways. I just prefer using Prosecco because it's one of my favourites. And with the table, I've got my Samhain candles there, and I've popped a pink one in just for the femme aspect of Walpurga. And for a nod to Beltane in the north, I've got a little phallic symbol there with the asparagus, and I've got some artichoke hearts and semi-sun-dried tomatoes to go with the cheese. And there's that gorgeous black bread. This is one of my favourite breads of all time. I just absolutely love it. And everything went well together, and it was truly a witchy night. Hi, kitty. And I got a book as a gift. My husband bought me a little witchy book, and I couldn't wait to sit back and relax, have another wine, read about my fellow witches from the past in this awesome book that I highly recommend it. Hi, Diesel. Thank you once again for joining me here on Vegan Kitchen Witchery for Walpurgisnacht. I have enjoyed sharing this information with you. If you have enjoyed it too, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you soon with some more videos. Thank you again.